Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Today, we're going to talk about scandal and controversy. These are two words which basically mean something which everyone's talking about. A scandal and a controversy or a controversy, they're interchangeable words, usually is something which gets people talking. It doesn't have to be criminal, but it can be. It's something which people feel is unjust, something which is unfair. That could be a new law that's coming in. It could be a criminal act. Maybe a bad person has done a bad thing in the eyes of a community. Scandal and controversy both mean the same thing, and they have adjectives scandalous and controversial. In a business setting and in formal English, a controversy is the kind of thing you would hear. Scandal is more of a moral word, which is focusing purely on the idea that people are talking. Controversies get investigated, sometimes by the police or by the boss or something like this. Scandal is much more moral. But we use these words interchangeably, except perhaps in business, when it's usually a controversy or something is controversial. Now, this is an interesting story about our post office. So let me explain. Our government under Margaret Thatcher went through a period of privatizing many of the government departments. They privatized the water, they privatized the railway, they privatized the post office, and initially what they did was they partially privatized them. Like, for example, in the railway, they maintained ownership of the actual rails, even though the companies running the railway were private. And in the post office, what they did was they made the post office a private company, and the government owned 30% of the shares until eventually it sold all of them. The government still has overall responsibility for the post office because of its history, but it is a private company. Anyway, the post office decided that it needed a new computer system in the 1990s. And at that time, it brought in a system called Horizon. But nobody knew that this new computer system called Horizon was actually faulty. It didn't work properly. And as a result, many of the people who run our over-the-counter postal services were accused of stealing money. Now, this is a very serious thing. So more than 700 post offices up and down the country had their figures showing as incorrect, and the post office assumed that they had stolen the money. So 700 people were prosecuted. Many of them went to prison because of this, and 4 of them killed themselves because post offices are very much part of local communities. And of course, if someone is accused of stealing money or is convicted of stealing money. Convicted means that they actually, in the eyes of the law, did that terrible thing, then of course it causes a great controversy. So the post office took legal action against 700 of them. 500 of them were prosecuted, many going to prison, and 4 killed themselves. Then, some years later, many years later, the post office acknowledged that there was a problem with Horizon and that actually these people were all innocent. And so they've started reinvestigating just to make sure that all of the people convicted, of course, should be declared as innocent. Now, this is ongoing, and they've made a TV drama about it, which is on the BBC at the moment, called Mr. Bates and the Post Office. And it seems that even during this drama, many more people have come forward and said, wait a minute, this affected me too. There's people that worked at the post office. So it's a really big thing. And despite the fact that these people now have been told they're innocent, they're still waiting for their compensation from the Royal Mail. The Royal Mail is the official name for our post office. So they're still waiting. And year after year, they're really hoping that they get the compensation that they deserve. I mean, if you go to prison for stealing money and you didn't actually steal it, of course, you're entitled to compensation. So the Royal Mail, the post office, they say, oh, but they have to be sure everyone's innocent. And I think they've paid so far 2 or 3 of the people. And the government now is involved, and it's saying we can legally exonerate these people, and that means to lift the burden of guilt. The government can use their power to make them innocent again, basically. And if they do that, the post office will have to, of course, immediately pay them. But there's all kinds of legal complications. After this documentary, well, it was actually a drama on the BBC this week, the police have now been called in because they need to make sure there was no frauds. Now, I don't know who they think maybe committed fraud, whether it was the post office itself or whether it was maybe some of the people in it, but they need to be sure that there was no criminal offense. Now, I would have thought the police would have been involved from the beginning against the Royal Mail, but, well, they haven't been. So anyway, that's the story of the post office. Now, like all of these companies who were owned by the government, they have very powerful unions because, of course, all government departments had powerful unions. And even though they've been privatized, the unions still remain. There's the Post Office Workers Union. There's the union for the trains as well. And that's why you hear a lot of strikes and demands for more money, because a lot of people who work in these sectors, they don't kind of realize that they have to give a service in order for people to use them and to like them. All we seem to hear is we want more money. We want more money or we're going to go on strike. But as we all know, working in the private sector, you have to kind of give a good service to be entitled to more money. And when that happens, then of course people will use your company and will like you. But government departments, I think part of the problem is after privatization, they never really moved on because their computer systems were still operated by the government and their infrastructure was very governmental. They had problems modernizing and adjusting to the private sector. I think that was part of the problem. Anyway, we're going to look now at some idioms regarding scandals and controversies. Well, one thing we could say about this is that the Royal Mail, the company that is the post office, it's in hot water. And finding yourself under scrutiny means that you're in hot water. So to be in hot water means you're in trouble, basically. And the woman who was I think she was the managing director or the chairwoman of the post office at the time of this scandal, she is now a CBE. Now, we mentioned the New Year's Honours list a few days ago. So when you receive a reward from the king, you get an OBE, an MBE, or a CBE. I think the CBE is related to business. I can't remember. But people are demanding that her CBE is taken away from her. I mean, not that it makes a lot of difference, I suppose, but there are calls for that to happen. So the post office is in hot water. Also, if this isn't sorted out soon, it could become a national issue which causes a lot of backlash. Backlash is when people want revenge. They might stop using the post office. They might refuse to cooperate with the post office. It could affect the government because, of course, the government has overall responsibility for it. So they need to get involved quick, otherwise people might not vote for them. So in many ways, they are really playing with fire the longer this goes on. When you play with fire, you engage in risky, dangerous, or controversial behavior that could cause you more trouble. Also, adding fuel to the fire is when you basically add more fuel to make the fire bigger. And of course, with this new drama that came out this week, it added fuel to the fire. Now people really are saying, okay, look, it's been years. Where's our money? Other idioms you could use, well, sometimes when people don't talk about things in the way that they should, you could say there's an elephant in the room, and that means there's an obvious problem or controversial issue that everyone knows about, but no one talks about it. An elephant in the room. So that's another one. And my final one, just to tell you, is between a rock and a hard place. And that means facing a dilemma that you can't get out of. You're between a rock and a hard place. You're facing a dilemma or having to make a choice between two equally unattractive options. So I think all of those apply to the post office right now. And those poor people who are waiting to be exonerated for the law to forgive them, and also for their money. And of course, where there's money involved, there won't be much forgiveness. Now, this is why I think that discipline, whether it's in learning a language or whether it's declaring someone guilty or whatever, is never a good way forward. You have to be a little bit gentle. And so I would remind you all again, if you're learning English purely by forcing yourself to sit down and do stuff that you ultimately hate, don't. Yeah, a much better way would be to engage in human conversation and actually talking to people rather than writing essays for days and days and days. Of course, if you're doing an exam, you do need the practice, but generally speaking, remember that language is something which, by its very nature, needs to be shared. It's not something that you can do alone. So, whether it's now or in the future, at some point you're going to have to use it. You're going to have to talk to somebody. And I'm just saying that discipline is not the way forward. If the post office had stopped and listened to 700 people up and down the country who were telling them that there was a problem, then maybe things would not have turned so badly wrong. There we are. So that's the story today about the post office, and I hope these idioms have helped you to understand the post office controversy, or the Horizon scandal as it's been known. All right, that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let's talk again soon. See you. Bye.